Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given.
But I'm Brenda J. I didn't even tell you who I was, and Karen just
Brenda.
I just got here.
Yeah, you sound
Hi, Karen.
Yeah, you
Hi.
sound really clear now. Sorry about the mix-up. Karen has a problem with time zones.
I do. I just got an app that I'm hoping will help me keep track of it better.
She works for the airlines. We both did. I'm like, how did you work for an airline? I didn't.
It automatically figured it for me. I didn't have to figure it out myself.
Yeah, I mean, I talk to people from all over the world, so I do the same thing all the time.
Welcome to the Hang On to Hope podcast. This is Karen W. Today we have Patrick Doyle on our show. Patrick Doyle has over 30 years of working with people from all over in treatment centers, churches, and through his professional office. Patrick's own story of emotional and physical abuse has resonated with many. His personal story of pain and survival has filled others with hope. So welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for having this podcast.
Oh, thank you for what you do.
Yes, definitely.
We all need that
My pleasure.
validation. So I first heard about you many years ago through some videos from Dev TV that were on YouTube. And I see there's still some of them on there. I don't know if they're all still on there, but I did find a few that are still there.
Yeah.
Where you talked about emotional and spiritual abuse, and it was just so validating to me at the time. And I know that you have your own show now. So we would just love to hear if you want to start out sharing about a little bit about your story with us and our listeners.
So I have been a counselor for 30 plus years. I don't approach this subject from a therapeutic mindset. I approach the subject from a survivor and someone who's been through it. Being raised in an alcoholic home, my mom dying when I was 10 from alcoholism on Christmas morning. That was pleasant.
Wow.
And so I was fairly upset. All my siblings are at least 10 years or more older than me. My mom had me when she was 42. She died at 52. And my dad, being a violent alcoholic, PTSD, 2-war veteran, was a dangerous guy. And so, my mom dies at 10. And then I'm left with the crazy man. I was, I was pretty upset with God for that one. Like, really? At least take the one that, is harmful. The one who just sits in the chair and drinks and smokes. That'd be better. So I grew up in a very abusive environment, and I learned how to survive. I learned how to read people. I learned how to not get harmed by my dad. And in that process, when you're in an abusive environment as a kid, some of you guys know I did a webinar recently on what happened to you as opposed to what's wrong with you. And I believe all of us have experiences that alter us. So I'm a child in an abusive alcoholic home. There's no way I can get through that without being told some messaging that will later harm me. So I got 2 out of control parents teaching me about how the world works. Well, they're not accurate. And there's a lot of other ways that the world works that are very healthy. But as a kid, I didn't know that. And so that created a whole bunch of internal realities for me that took me a lot of time to work out. And that harm that we experience, and again, it's my opinion that harm is in the eyes of the beholder. If it's harmful to you, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter. I see people all the time comparing themselves, and I believe that the comparison is always a losing proposition. Comparison is also another way that we compare ourselves to others so that we don't have to face our own difficulty. And it's a cop-out to face the difficulty we have. And look, all of us do it because who wants to walk into the buzzsaw of pain? No one. So as a child, I learned how to survive. I got saved when I was 17. And what happened to me was my shame and my worldview that was given to me by 2 sick people got spiritualized. Now, I don't believe that the people around me in the church were trying to teach me that God was going to get me if I didn't obey him. But growing up in an alcoholic home where my dad was a 2-war veteran and a drill sergeant, and by the way, after he retired, he was a kneecap breaker for the mob. So he was, a guy that, there was, if you made your bed appropriately, you didn't get harmed. But if you messed up, there was severe and intense consequences. So when I got saved, I started reading the Bible and I read the Old Testament. I was, okay, God's a little bit like my dad. You got to do what he wants or you're going to get in trouble or he won't bless you. Now, I don't believe that the guy that was preaching or the people around me were trying to tell me that, but this is what I'm saying. What happened to you as you grew up is so important because it creates a filter of beliefs through which you see the world. And if you don't look at that filter of beliefs, you're doomed to repeat the messaging that you received. The messaging I received was, I'm inadequate. I'm not good enough. One of the things my dad used to say to me all the time is, you're stupid. So I'm just finishing a book. The working title right now is The Death of 1,000 Cuts. It's about the process of being in an emotionally abusive relationship. But writing this book has taken me almost 5 years. And it's not because I didn't know the content, because the content's been there. But I didn't realize this till about 3 years in, that the message I received from my dad that I'm stupid was impacting me in terms of writing the book, because I didn't believe I was capable or that it would be successful or that anybody would listen to me. And it was that old training and messaging that my dad had sent that was really harming me. So I had to learn how to start telling myself the truth as it related to that. I've read thousands of books since then. I'm not stupid. But when you're trained and have that beat into you, in my case, it's very paralyzing. And so every single one of us has that on some level. So then I got into the church. I got married at 27, had kids in my early 30s, and I married somebody who was emotionally abusive. And if you talk about, watching my radio and TV shows on the Dove, and in the midst of doing those shows, I was in the middle of an abusive marriage.
Wow.
And that's why I've come to the place that I've come, is that I've worked through the pain. I've looked at the difficulty. And one of my favorite quotes, the avoidance of pain is the beginning of all unhealthy behavior. Mm-hmm. And I see this as rampant in the church because we spiritualize pain and we avoid it and feel noble about it. But, and I did that. And so I'm not saying that as an accusation. I'm saying that as a confession. That's what I did. And I had 1,000 Bible verses to back myself up, but it didn't change the fact that I was in a situation that was harmful, and working with other people in the situation and watching what was happening to my kids eventually woke me up. My denial broke and I started to see the raw reality of what was happening in my life and what was happening to my kids. And that pain is what led me to freedom. And it was an expensive process. As a public figure in my town, divorcing my wife as a pastor and a radio and TV show host on our Christian TV station, there was a lot of pain that came with that. And I would tell you this, I'd do it again, because the freedom that came, not just to me, but to my kids, and now thousands of other people that I'm able to speak to online and in other ways in my office, it's having a revolutionary effect. My story is one of a lot of pain, but it's also a story of resilience, because I was willing to look at the situation honestly and deal with the consequence of that, whatever they were. Mm-hmm. Ending my marriage was one of those, and it took me probably 10 years to get up the courage to do that. So I hear women say all the time, I stayed way too long. I'm like, yeah, me too. I mean, I had all kinds of reasons. I mean, I had the culture around me saying, I can't, you can't. Even though the people that were close to me would look at me cross-eyed and be like, what are you doing? This is very harmful. And then they'd hear me talk glowingly about my situation. They just would look at me like, what? How do you say that? We saw it, and in my case, it wasn't hard to see. Okay. But I did a lot of denial. I spiritualized. I worked really hard to make it okay. I was saying I was doing it for my kids. And the ultimate end was when I told my kids about the divorce, so that I was going to divorce their mom. The first thing my oldest son said to me was, "Dad, I wish you'd have done this a long time ago."
Yeah, that's what my kids said too. My kids were.
I was like, "Dang, I thought I was doing you a favor."
Yeah, we think we're staying for the kids, but there's so much evidence.
That's a whole nother lie right there. But I felt noble about it, like it justified my avoidance. I'm doing this for my children. And actually, no, I was just avoiding the pain of what I knew was going to come. And to share honestly, the consequences of that process, I almost died. I was so broken internally, and I had so much judgment from people and abandonment from people, which touched all of my hardcore childhood wounds. And there was a period of time that I was suicidal. And I think a lot of women feel that. They'd rather die than go on because it seems so difficult. But, I had a couple of people around me that were very, very loving, and it saved me. So that's the other thing I want to tell people is like, look, you can't go through a situation like that and not have people around you to help. You can't do it alone. You need help. And finding safe help is so important, which is why I'm so grateful you're doing this, because people need to know that there are those of us out there that have suffered and are willing to be a part of their suffering and walk them through.
Yeah. Safe help is important because I had some unsafe help as well. And I had to learn a lesson through it, but it was because I needed someone. I mean, you do need someone. Being alone doesn't help either. So I only had unsafe choices and then learned to have safe choices after that. So
and that was really my inspiration for starting Pathway to Hope, the membership program that I have, is because while there is a ton of good videos that I made about different subjects that are important, to me, that's not the best part of it. The best part of it is the community. You have a group of people who get it, and there's no judgment, and there's no fixing it, and there's no Bible bashing, and there's no telling you the 6 verses you need to know to, and I pay, you watch my YouTube videos, you see Amber, she's the community relations director, and she's in the forums on a regular daily basis to make sure that it's safe.
And moderate so that there's no trolls or anything.
Yes. I mean, otherwise I was in AA as a young man. You can't get a bunch of hurt people together and expect it to go well.
Yeah, you do need a little bit of boundaries there.
you need some help. You need some boundaries, and you need some safe people to help you navigate, because we're all in that situation. We're all trying to figure out how to live, how to do it differently. And that requires that vulnerability to change like that requires very real safety, which is why I think boundaries are so profoundly important. If you don't have healthy boundaries, you are going to experience harm.
Yeah. Well, speaking of boundaries, we thought we'd talk about boundaries today.
That's what I heard.
We haven't addressed that on our podcast yet. And it's very important to anyone in an abusive relationship.
If you were in an abusive relationship, I mean, you automatically have boundary problems because that's how you got in the relationship. 100%
so true. 100%.
No, we haven't covered boundaries.
So we thought, no, this is an important topic. And
that's great.
So Absolutely. Can you start out by defining boundaries for us?
Okay, well, I think that's a great question, because there's a lot of definitions for that. But I kind of have my own from experience with not only myself, but lots of other people. So I think a boundary is, in essence, you letting someone else know where they stop and you begin. Okay? And I would say also these 2 things about that. An effective boundary does a couple of things. One, it protects you and gives you safety from other people. And 2, it provides discomfort and or pain to the person that's harming you to send a message like, that's not okay. And if you keep doing it, relationship will end. Mm-hmm. And this is the difficult part, because if you've been in an abusive relationship, or you grew up in an abusive home, or you have a shame message that says you don't matter, or you're not worth the skin you're printed in, one of the core beliefs you have is you can't upset people.
Right. You don't want to
here's the deal. Conflict. Here is the deal. Letting people be upset is the most loving thing you can do. I say it all the time. I put it out on my social media. The most loving thing you can do if someone is hurting you is stop them. That's love. But we are trained and told otherwise, particularly in the church, That if you make somebody uncomfortable or you make them upset, then you're the bad person. You're not being spiritual. And then you look at the example of Jesus and he made people so mad they killed him because he wouldn't comply. He wouldn't submit to their version of reality. And this is what we have to do. So we have to be honest about what's happening to us and what the other person is doing. And then we have to start to set boundaries that give us safety and give them the message that it's not okay to be treated that way.
Yeah. And I watched your video. You have a video on your show regarding boundaries, and you say that setting a boundary is twofold. And you kind of already said this, but that one, a boundary is set to be protected from something. And two, to let the other person know it is no longer okay to treat them a certain way. I think, like you're saying, many of us struggle with boundaries. We don't want to cause that conflict. I think that's a really big factor. I know for me, that's why I tend to not. I just let it go. And it could be little things, but after a while, those little things start building up, and we worry about the reaction and what that might cause. So can you give us some feedback and the importance of overcoming these obstacles that we all have that keep us from, taking the time to set the boundaries?
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about something I think is more at the base of why this is. And this might be a bit delicate, but I believe that the church as a whole, and I say this as an ex-pastor who used to teach this, so I'm not on any sort of ivory tower. I am where I'm at today, what I'm about to say, from seeing the damage of what I believed. So I believe the church has made a huge error in that its theological stance is men are more valuable than women.
Yeah.
And that's a tragic miscalculation. That's an error. I don't believe it's biblical at all, even though people will spout all day long about how, Eve was deceived, not Adam. But I don't know if you guys know, but one of my mentors before he died was Dr. Larry Crabb. And he wrote a book called The Silence of Adam, which was all about Adam. When you look at this scripture closely, where was Adam when Eve was deceived? Sitting right next to her. So the silence of Adam was the problem. The way we've characterized it is Eve had a character defect that Adam didn't have. No, not true. And if I heard one problem in my counseling career more than any other, is just as bad as abuse is the disregard of a man to a woman that's justified by his spiritual authority and higher position. So when we start with a position of women are less valuable, and then it leads into it's your job to make him happy. It's your job to make him sexually satisfied. It's your job to make him satisfied with food. It's your job to make sure the house is taken care of. It's your job to make sure it's your job to do everything.
Yes.
Except maybe make money. And even then, sometimes it's your job to chip in. So that whole belief structure that the church has is a tragic problem. And women have been destroyed for centuries based on it.
Yes.
And I will not believe that that's a healthy thing. Any woman I've ever, and the crazy thing is, I've talked to thousands of women who have been in emotionally abusive relationships within the church, and they get treated with abject horror by churches, by husbands, by families. And you know what? Maybe 3 of the thousands that I've talked to are not genuinely kind, beautiful, gentle souls, even after they've been harmed. Mm-hmm. And this is what I want to say is like, look at the evidence. The soul of a woman is no less valuable than a man. That's insane. Why would God value part of his creation less than the other? Okay, so if once we correct that lie, now we move into a situation where one person, and I say this a lot, but in the church, what I see a lot of times is the church wants to claim neutrality in an abusive situation. We're going to work with both parties. Now, in a difficult relationship, okay, fine. But there's a strong difference between a difficult relationship and a destructive one, right, where one person is being systematically destroyed by the other. If you choose neutrality in an abusive relationship, you are choosing abuse. Mm. And that choice is made by pastors and churches based on their wrong theology that women are less valuable. Yeah. So that's the core of the problem. Wow. So if you have that core of the problem, think about the subconscious mindset of a woman. when you walk into the pastor's office, you already know you're the problem. And listen, I've done this myself. So I'm saying this from experience, not, I don't got no axe to grind, but I'm going to tell the truth. I've said this many times. I don't think you have the right to point out the dirt unless you're willing to wash the feet. I've been washing the feet of the church for 30 years, so I got lots of authority on this. So a pastor's theology is that marriage is an idol, and that's what I would say, because no matter what, you have to stay in the marriage, no matter what. And I've heard horrific things that pastors have said to women as it relates to them being harmed in a marriage. The worst one I heard was a pastor say to a woman who'd been put in the hospital twice by her husband, physically harming her to the point of almost dying. The pastor said, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? You die and then you go to heaven.
That's great.
And I'm like, that is insane. We need to deal with this. So you have a woman walks into a pastor's office. She already knows what's going to be said, whether she's conscious of it or not. Intuitively, she knows. So I say this to women all the time. If you go to your pastor and you tell him you're being abused and he doesn't believe you, don't talk to him again. That's the first boundary you need to set. You cannot allow people in your world who do not believe your story.
Right.
And that boundary is really difficult. And it takes time to set because it's going against everything you've been trained in. But that training is problematic. And we wouldn't be having this huge problem in the church if it weren't for that unhealthy belief about the devaluation of women.
Yeah, that's very true.
So to set a boundary against all that authority, to set a boundary against all that spiritual, biblical knowledge, any woman who does it is my hero. With the courage it takes to do that, to say to their husband no, to say to their pastor no. And I've seen countless women, as soon as they set a boundary, they lose their pastor, they lose their faith community, and they become the villain, even though they're the victim. So it's double harm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So setting a boundary in that context is very difficult. And so what I just want to do is acknowledge that and say, look, this isn't easy. This is really hard. But the avoidance of pain, my favorite quote from him, Scott Peck, the avoidance of pain is the beginning of all unhealthy behavior. That's the bottom line. So if we're going to avoid it, there's no hope. We're just going to get harmed and upon harmed upon harmed. So I say to people all the time, the harm of abuse leads to no freedom. The harm that you receive from setting a boundary offers you the opportunity for freedom. Yeah. So that pain is productive. The pain of not setting a boundary is not productive. It just makes you a continual abuse victim. So setting the boundary is painful. And this is the thing I say to people all the time. Start small. When you're in a bad situation and somebody's harming you and then you get really upset and you're reactive and you say, that's it, I'm moving out or I'm kicking you out, which is very normal and understandable, but no one can hold that boundary.
Yeah.
That's not something you can hold. So I always encourage women, start with a boundary that you can hold. One of the ones I encourage women all the time is like, most women in abusive relationships do not want to be physically intimate with their husbands. And the reason why they don't want to be physically intimate with their husbands is because there's no safety. And safety emotionally and safety spiritually and physically are the things, safety and presence. A man really caring about a woman and her knowing it, those are the things that make a woman sexually desiring of a man. So this whole idea that it's your responsibility and obligation, see my interview on my YouTube channel with Sheila Gregoria about, the Great Sex Rescue.
Yeah, we've been on twice.
Yeah, exactly. So you get it. So, so if a woman is in an abusive environment, she's going to not want to be sexual. So that's one of the things I encourage her to do because she has an internal will to not want to have sex with her husband. So that's a decent boundary. And it's a one that really creates some problems because that gets right to his, right in his wheelhouse. It creates pain. And boundaries creating difficulty is the sign of a healthy boundary. If you're with someone who cares about you and you set a boundary, they're like, oh, okay, I want to obey that. I want to honor that because I love you. If you're with an abuser and you set a boundary, they get mad and they start blaming you, you got an abuser on your hands.
Yeah, right. Definitely. Well, you say a response to setting a boundary should not be, you shouldn't feel that way. Can you expound on that?
Whenever someone says that you should not feel a certain way, they are being disregarding of you. And I would say that disregard is one of the most problematic, painful things I've seen women experience. Someone treating you as if your desires, what your spirit is saying, what your perception of the world is invalid or inaccurate. That is in essence gaslighting. Mm. When your perceptions are told to be wrong. And the only perception that is accurate is his or the church's. That undermining, in my estimation, that's just flat out hardcore abuse.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
When someone says you shouldn't feel that way, that's an instant flag to me. Like, what do you have to say about my feelings? I get to feel any way I want. You don't get to choose what I feel.
Yeah.
Right? But that's not how you hear it in the church. Mm-mm. And it's even in culture. I mean, it's changing some in culture at large, but the number one thing for me that signals whether a relationship will be healthy or unhealthy is the level of denial possessed by the people in the relationship. So in every relationship I've been involved in that's abusive, you have one person who's in what I call Olympic level denial. They believe their own lies and they don't lose any sleep. And the woman, on the other hand, is trying to make sense of it. And she's losing sleep and wondering. And this is where all the self-doubt comes from. And the feelings. I mean, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. One of the number one signs is I feel crazy. Well, the only way to get out of crazy is with really good boundaries. Yeah. But when you're at a power deficit, that's really difficult, which is why I'm so encouraging women to get into a safe and healthy community that understands. Because with that support, it's going to give you the strength to fight. And let's just be honest, there's no way out without a fight.
Yeah. They're going to need some support.
Yeah. And so what I encourage women to do, instead of spending energy on the abuser and trying to fix them or get them to understand, I encourage women to spend energy on developing their internal strength so that they can fight and set boundaries that are consequential and meaningful. And listen, if somebody you set a boundary with and they respond appropriately, you're going to trust them more. If you set a boundary with somebody and they, use all the tactics, rationalize, minimize, justify, deny, spiritualize, gaslight, stonewall, whatever, that's going to lead to less intimacy, less relationship, less trust. And the other big mistake that I see the church making, and that I've made myself, is that trust is carte blanche. If you're a woman, you're just supposed to trust your husband. And this was the other big error, I think, of Eggerich's book, Love and Respect, is that men are deserving of unconditional respect. No one is deserving of unconditional respect. Maybe God, but people have to earn it. They have to earn your trust and they have to earn your respect by trustworthy behavior and respectful behavior. If somebody behaves in a trustworthy fashion or with respect, you're going to respect them. You're going to trust them. But if they don't, and you continue to trust or respect them, the only option is for you to be harmed.
Right. That's why that book was very damaging to our marriage.
We did a podcast on that as well. Too.
Yeah, we talked about that book a lot. We
still very damaging.
Yeah.
And the level of spiritualization that takes place around that is not very pleasant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think that is a problem in the church, and not necessarily in the church. It's just that, but what I was taught, I think my ex-husband taught me this, that he was the head.
Yes.
So therefore, there were no boundaries because whatever he said goes.
Yes.
So I came out of that marriage after 22 years, not even really understanding what a boundary is, because abusers don't know what boundaries are because what they say goes.
Well, they don't like boundaries. So.
Yeah. And listen, the church supports their autonomy of authority. Yeah. No consequence to their behavior. Their behavior is irrelevant. The only thing that matters, and I've talked about this many times, I think the church has done two things. I'll take the heat for this because it's my belief. But number one, they've idolized marriage. They've made marriage an idol.
Yeah.
Staying married at all costs is not a biblical mandate or even a biblical revelation.
Right.
And the other thing we've done, and this is the tricky part, we've idolized the Bible. Jesus was with the disciples and he said, "Hey, I'm leaving. It's a good thing I leave. And when I leave, I'm going to send you the Bible." Nope. He said, "I'm going to send you the Spirit."
Yeah, Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay. And what we've done is we've made the Bible the Spirit. But listen, how many opinions are there of the Bible?
Yeah,
do you know how many denominations exist of Christianity in the world right now? Take a guess.
100?
30,000.
Wow.
30,000.
30,000.
Some estimates 40,000.
Wow, I didn't think it was that much.
Right, neither did I. Let's think about that for a second. So what does that mean? You have 30,000 versions of the truth, because every single one of those churches is saying the same thing. We have the truth of God from the Bible. Well, at 30,000, I don't think that's possible. Yeah. You have fractals of the truth.
Yeah.
right? So I don't know if you are aware of this, but I like to say this because it's so important to understand. Up until, recent history, all through antiquity, you basically had two denominations. You had Orthodoxy and you had Catholicism and you had Judaism, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then you had the Reformation, the 1400s, and now you had Judaism, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and now you had Presbyterianism, or what we in America see as, the evangelical church. But that was born from the Reformation. And then that's what you basically had was those basic denominations until the mid 1800s. And the reason why is this: up until that point in history, no one, not the average person, did not have access to the Bible. In fact, up until that point, the mid 1800s, when it started to change, the vast majority of the population, roughly 90 to 95% of the population, was illiterate. Mm. It was only the elites and the scholars that even had access to read the Bible.
Right.
So then in the 1800s, after the Gutenberg press is invented, and then, centuries go by, and then now it's starting to produce the Bible in multiple languages. In the 1800s, you got the pilgrims coming from Europe to America, and they're bringing the Bible, and now it's getting into the hands of everybody. And if you look at a chart at the exponential growth of denominationalism, that's when it started. Because now everybody's reading the Bible and adding their opinion.
Yeah, well, that makes so much more sense why the Holy Spirit is our guide and why Jesus is the Holy Spirit. It makes so much sense because if I believed everything that I was told, I just feel like through his Holy Spirit, he's allowing us women that were abused, that were victims, that are survivors now to rise up. Mm-hmm. And I don't see myself as less than in any way, shape, or form. And the freedom that I felt from being able to set these boundaries after being free, there's nothing better. There's no better feeling than not settling, not controlling at all, and setting those boundaries and saying, I will not be mistreated again. And I hope the women listening will rise up and in the safety and just take a step, because I made a lot of mistakes, and I have this podcast to help prevent mistakes.
Mistakes are part of the process, but this is the thing that I teach very profoundly within my program, is that your guide for going through this process is your gut or your spirit. I've talked to lots of people. And here's the thing. I've never talked to a woman who's in an abusive relationship that didn't tell me, I knew early on, but I denied it. My gut was telling me. Mm-hmm. But then I spiritualized it, but then my family, but then I was afraid, but then finances, but then kids, but then, I had to stay married. There's 1,000 reasons why we do it. And I did it. But if I'd have listened to my gut, I tried to leave 3 times before we were married.
Yeah. I actually called our wedding off the first time.
Yeah. It wasn't because my gut wasn't signaling it, but I kept spiritualizing it.
Yeah. You just ignore your emotions. And I think what you said is true. Cause I think if there's spiritual abuse, they're focusing on the law, like word, but that there's a spirit behind the law, like the Holy Spirit is behind like the whole meaning of the law. And Jesus came to explain a lot of that, but
And your harm would not be the outcome of the law.
Right.
You submitting to someone who's systematically destroying you is not a biblical thing. That is evil.
Right.
Disguised as biblical. And, John MacArthur telling a predator, sex offender, convicted pedophile, telling the wife that she has to take him back because that's what God wants. Yeah. John MacArthur's delusional.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of.
What's his name? Doug Wilson does the same thing. It happens all over the place. The SBC, 700 verified cases of pastoral sexual abuse. 700.
Wow.
What do they got? They got nothing on the Catholics. And so anywhere where you see a closed system, where there's no ability to have a discussion, there's top-down authority, you see abuse. Doesn't matter where it is.
Right.
And so, the silencing of a person's voice or a whole group of people, women, silencing their voice and them not being able to say what's real for them is abuse on a systematic system. The system is now creating systematic abuse. So if you're in a church where you're set a boundary and they give you guff, leave. Don't stay. Don't try to convince them. I tell this to women all the time. I've answered this question at least 10 times a month. Should I try to convince my pastor of what's happening? No. If he doesn't believe you, shake the dust off your feet and move away. Leave. Because their theological stance is not going to be changed by your situation. Contrary to what you might think, I've talked to hundreds of women who have confronted their pastors to no avail. All that happens is they waste energy and time that they need to spend on their own strength to get their children and them to safety, not trying to fix the church. That's not a job you're going to do. It's not the time or place. Maybe when you're out and you're safe, then go back.
Right.
But not in the midst of it. It's a waste of time and energy, and it's way too harmful. You don't need any extra abuse. So that's another boundary I would set with a church. If you go to a pastor or an elder or a friend and they don't believe you and they try to tell you to forgive, they try to tell you to have more sex and cook better meals and be nicer. And if you weren't so upset or you weren't so whatever, then he'd be okay. Anytime you hear any of that, just shut them out, walk away. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to be upset, but just know if they say that, they're unsafe and they need to have a boundary. Like, I'm not talking to you. I don't trust you.
Right.
And that, if we could just do that, you could save yourself so much harm and store up energy that you need for the actual fight of getting yourself free.
Yeah, and then experiencing pain from someone a little or a lot over time can build up. And that is why we get to this place where a boundary has to be set in order for a relationship to continue.
Yep.
This can be in any relationship, not just a marriage, but I mean, and that's where the main context we're talking about it here, but it can also be friendships, work relationship, a family member, etc. Can you explain why trying to set a boundary in a reactive state is not the best time to do it? You kind of were saying like, you can, sometimes you just, in your in the heat of the moment, you may say something that you can't enforce.
So one of my rules of thumb for boundary setting is always set a boundary you can keep.
To be continued. Stay tuned for next week's part 2 of Boundaries with Patrick Doyle. You don't want to miss it.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.